The small town of Cedar Bluff, Texas, sat beneath a constant haze of dust kicked up by the relentless prairie wind. The late 90s brought little change to this forgotten corner of America, where the town's heart pulsed faintly through its grocery store, diner, and a shuttered movie theater that whispered of better days. Sadie Marshall, a striking woman in her mid-30s, navigated Cedar Bluff's gritty streets with a resilience that belied her weary eyes. Her auburn hair, once lustrous, was streaked with silver threads, and her skin bore the weathered texture of someone who had fought battles she could never win. As a single mother, Sadie's life revolved around her two sons, Cam and Dan, but the weight of her choices bore down on her like the oppressive Texan heat. Cam had inherited his father's sharp cheekbones and intense blue eyes, but where his father had exuded recklessness, Cam embodied responsibility. A quiet determination defined his every move, from the way he folded the sleeves of his work shirt at the local grocery store to the meticulous care he showed toward his younger brother. Dan, 12, was the dreamer of the family, his untamed curls and wide smile hiding the insecurity that came from growing up in a household marked by poverty and instability. Sadie's ex-husband, Charlie, had vanished like a ghost when she became pregnant with Dan. He worked on an offshore oil rig. He promised to support her, but delivered nothing. Leaving Sadie to fend for herself, Sadie had turned to a string of boyfriends, each worse than the last. Cam bore the brunt of their disdain, his protective nature often leading to bruises and sleepless nights. Cam's shifts at Manson's grocery were his sanctuary, a place where he could escape the volatile tension at home and focus on tasks he could control. Stocking shelves and ringing up groceries weren't glamorous jobs, but they gave him a sense of purpose. More importantly, they earned him a paycheck, most of which went toward keeping the electricity on and putting food on the table. By the time Cam turned 16, he had taken a job at Manson's Grocery, the town's modest supermarket. The store manager, Terry Manson, was a man in his late 50s with a stocky build, graying hair, and a warmth that set him apart from most in Cedar Bluff. Terry saw something special in Cam, a spark of potential that reminded him of his younger self. "Kid, you've got grit," Terry said one evening as he and Cam unloaded crates of canned goods in the stockroom. "Don't waste it here. Go get yourself an education. Be better than this town." Dan, Cam's little brother, oblivious to the weight Cam carried, idolized his older brother. On slow nights, Cam would bring home bruised apples or day-old bread from the store, spinning them into a makeshift feast that made Dan's eyes light up. They would sit on the worn linoleum floor of their small kitchen, laughing as they imagined the lives of the rich and famous. "One day, we'll have steak and baked potatoes every night," Dan said, his voice full of wonder, "and we'll live in one of those big houses with a swimming pool." Cam smiled faintly, ruffling Dan's curls. "Yeah, kid, one day." But Cam's smile faltered when he heard the sharp slam of the front door. Sadie had come home, her movements erratic, her voice slurred. Another boyfriend, this one named Roy, stumbled in behind her, his presence filling the air with the acrid smell of cheap whiskey. Cam tensed, instinctively positioning himself between Dan and the intruder. "Cam," Sadie snapped, her tone harsh, "why's the trash still sitting by the door? You do nothing around here. Just like your father, lazy and useless." Cam's jaw tightened, her words cutting deeper than he'd ever admit. He clenched his fists but said nothing, silently taking the trash outside to avoid an argument. Dan followed, his small hands clutching the edge of Cam's shirt. "Why's she always so mean to you?" Dan whispered, his voice trembling. Cam knelt down, looking Dan in the eye. "She's just mad at the world, I guess. But it's not your job to worry about that, okay? You focus on school and your dreams." Dan nodded reluctantly, though his young mind couldn't fully understand the complexities of their mother's anger or the sacrifices Cam made to shield him. Cam found solace in Terry Manson, the store manager who had taken a liking to him. Terry's gruff exterior belied a kind heart, and he often stayed late to chat with Cam, sharing stories from his younger days. "You're a good kid," Terry said one evening, leaning on the counter as Cam finished sweeping the floor. "You remind me of myself at your age, hungry for something better. Don't let this town drag you down." Cam hesitated, unsure how to respond. No one had ever spoken to him like that before, as though he were capable of more than just surviving. Terry noticed the boy's uncertainty and clapped him on the shoulder. "Listen," Terry continued. "If you want it bad enough, there's a way out. College, trade school, anything. You're smart, and you've got work ethic. Don't waste it." The idea of leaving Cedar Bluff seemed impossible, almost laughable. But Terry's words planted a seed in Cam's mind. For the first time, he began to envision a life beyond the dusty streets and the constant weight of responsibility. At home, things only worsened. Roy's presence became a regular fixture, and his hostility toward Cam was palpable. One night, after a particularly heated argument, Cam found himself standing in the kitchen, his hands shaking with frustration. Sadie's accusations about him being just like his father, about never amounting to anything, echoed in his mind. But instead of lashing out, Cam turned inward. He poured his energy into his job and his studies, taking every extra shift he could to save money. Terry noticed his determination and began to actively help, teaching him about budgeting and even offering to write a letter of recommendation for college. Sadie, however, dismissed Cam's efforts. "What's the point of college?" she scoffed one night when Cam mentioned his plans. "You'll just end up right back here, broke and useless." Her words stung, but Cam refused to let them deter him. If anything, they strengthened his resolve. He vowed to prove her wrong, not for her approval, but for himself and for Dan. One night, Cam overheard Sadie arguing with Roy in the living room. Their voices were loud and vicious, and the sound of something shattering sent Dan scurrying into Cam's room. Cam held his brother close, his own anger bubbling just beneath the surface. "Stay here," Cam whispered, his voice calm despite the storm raging inside him. He stepped into the living room to find Roy towering over Sadie, his face twisted with rage. Cam didn't hesitate. He positioned himself between them, his voice firm. "Leave. Now." Roy sneered, but something in Cam's steady gaze made him think twice. Muttering curses under his breath, he stormed out, slamming the door behind him. Sadie glared at Cam, her face flushed. "You think you're the man of the house now?" she spat. "You're nothing, Cam, just like your father." Cam felt his chest tighten, but he refused to give her the satisfaction of a reaction. Instead, he turned and walked back to his room where Dan waited with wide, fearful eyes. "Are we going to be okay?" Dan asked softly. Cam knelt beside him, taking his small hands in his own. "Yeah, we'll be okay," he said, his voice steady. "I promise." In that moment, Cam made a silent vow. He would find a way out of Cedar Bluff. Not just for himself, but for Dan, for the life they both deserved. Cam took Terry's words to heart, clinging to them on the toughest days. Working at the grocery store was exhausting, but it gave him a sense of purpose and control. His mother's venomous outbursts, on the other hand, were an ever-present storm cloud. No matter how hard Cam worked or how much he contributed, Sadie never missed an opportunity to tear him down. "You think you're better than me?" she spat one evening when Cam returned home late from a double shift. "You're just like Charlie, always chasing some pipe dream that'll leave you empty-handed." Cam bit his tongue, swallowing the sharp retort that threatened to spill out. He knew there was no use arguing with her. Instead, he channeled his anger and pain into action, pouring his energy into school and work. Each step forward felt like a rebellion against the bleak life Sadie had predicted for him. Terry continued to mentor Cam, teaching him lessons that extended far beyond the confines of the grocery store. "You've got to have a plan, Cam," Terry said one evening as they locked up the store. "Life doesn't just hand you success. You've got to take it, but you've got to take it smart." Terry helped Cam map out a future that included college, a concept that felt as distant as the stars to Cam. No one in his family had ever gone to college, but Terry made it seem attainable. He walked Cam through the application process, helped him research scholarships, and even drove him to campus tours. Sadie, however, remained dismissive. "College?" she scoffed. "And who's going to pay for that? You think some fancy degree's going to make your life perfect? You'll just end up back here, same as always." Her words stung, but Cam refused to let them derail him. With Terry's guidance, he earned a scholarship to a nearby community college and worked out a plan to cover the remaining costs. Terry even pitched in financially, despite Cam's protests. "This isn't charity, kid," Terry said firmly. "This is an investment, and I know it's one that'll pay off." The night before Cam left for college, he sat alone in his room, staring at the packed duffel bag on the floor. The room was small and bare, with peeling wallpaper and a single window that overlooked the dusty street. It had been his sanctuary for years, but now it felt suffocating. Sadie hadn't said much about his departure. She barely looked up when he told her he'd been accepted, muttering something about how he'd never last. Part of Cam had hoped she'd say she was proud, or at least wish him luck. But he'd stopped expecting that kind of support long ago. The only real goodbye came from Dan, who clung to him tightly, tears streaming down his face. "Don't forget about me," Dan whispered. Cam knelt down, holding his brother's shoulders. "I'll never forget about you," he promised, "and I'll come back for you. I'll make sure you have a better life too." College was a whirlwind. Cam threw himself into his studies, determined to make the most of the opportunity Terry had helped him secure. But it wasn't easy. He juggled part-time jobs, late-night study sessions, and the lingering pressure of proving himself. Through it all, Terry remained a steady presence, calling regularly to check in and offer encouragement. "Keep your head down and keep pushing," Terry would say. "The world's bigger than Cedar Bluff, Cam. You'll see that soon enough." Cam pushed forward. After 2 years at community college, he earned top marks and transferred to a university, where he majored in finance and business administration. It was there that his hard work began to pay off. He landed an internship with a prestigious financial firm and impressed his supervisors with his diligence and resourcefulness. By the time Cam graduated, he had secured a full-time position at the firm. Moving to the East Coast felt like stepping into another world, one filled with skyscrapers, tailored suits, and possibilities he'd never dared to dream of back in Cedar Bluff. Success didn't come overnight, but Cam climbed the ranks steadily, earning the respect of his colleagues and building a reputation as a rising star in the industry. His sharp cheekbones and piercing blue eyes, once a reminder of his father, became part of his polished, confident image. Yet beneath the surface, the scars of his past lingered. Cam, true to his words, he helped his brother Dan get into a college. After his graduate, Dan moved to the city with Cam to begin his new chapter in life. Cam stood in his office, the Manhattan skyline stretching out before him like a living postcard. The view was breathtaking, but his thoughts were miles away in Cedar Bluff. Cam and Terry spoke often on the phone, and Terry's health had taken a turn. And though Terry assured Cam it was nothing serious, Cam's gut told him otherwise. "Terry gave me my future," Cam mused, scrolling through his contacts. "The least I can do is make sure he's comfortable." He called the bank to arrange a steady deposit into Terry's account, a gesture he kept quiet. Terry was too proud to accept handouts openly, so Cam framed it as a return on the investment Terry had made in him. The deposits were discreet and regular, enough to cover Terry's medical bills and then some. But Cedar Bluff, like all small towns, had a way of turning whispers into rumors. Word of Terry's newfound financial stability reached Sadie, whose life had grown increasingly chaotic. Aging and bitter, she saw an opportunity. Cam's success wasn't just a distant story anymore. It was a tangible resource. And Terry, lonely and vulnerable, was her way in. Sadie arrived at Terry's modest home with a casserole in hand and an exaggerated smile on her face. "Hey there, Terry," she chirped, feigning warmth. "Thought I'd stop by and see how you're doing." Terry, ever polite, welcomed her in. At first, Sadie's visits seemed innocent enough. She brought meals, helped tidy up, and offered to run errands. But soon she began asking probing questions about his finances. "I don't mean to pry," she said one afternoon, her tone dripping with false concern. "But you've been looking so well cared for lately. Did you get some kind of inheritance?" Terry chuckled, shaking his head. "Cam's been helping me out. That boy's like a son to me, always looking out." Sadie's smile froze, but she quickly recovered. "That's sweet of him," she said, her mind already scheming. Over the next few months, Sadie manipulated her way into becoming Terry's primary caregiver. She convinced him to let her handle his errands and gradually gained access to his bank account. She siphoned small amounts at first, careful not to raise suspicion. But her greed grew bolder with time. One day, Cam's assistant knocked on the door to his corner office. "Mr. Marshall, you have a call from Cedar Bluff Bank," she said, handing him the phone. His heart sank as he picked up the receiver. Calls from Cedar Bluff rarely brought good news. "Mr. Marshall," the banker began, his voice polite but tinged with concern. "I wanted to alert you to some irregularities in Mr. Manson's account. We've noticed a series of substantial withdrawals and purchases that seem unusual." Cam's grip tightened on the phone. "Unusual how?" "Jewelry, high-end electronics, items that don't align with Mr. Manson's typical spending patterns. We thought you should know." Cam's mind raced. Terry wasn't the type to splurge, especially not on such extravagant items. There was only one other person who could have gained access to his account: his mother. "I'll look into it," Cam said, his voice steely. "Thank you for letting me know." Cam boarded the first flight back to Texas, his thoughts a turbulent mix of anger and sorrow. He hadn't seen his mother in years, their relationship strained to the point of silence. Still, the idea of her stealing from Terry, the one person who had truly cared for him, was unthinkable. When he arrived in Cedar Bluff, the familiar sights of his hometown stirred conflicting emotions. The cracked pavement, the sagging porches, the dusty air. It was as though time had stood still. He drove straight to Terry's house, his jaw tightening when he saw Sadie's car parked out front. Inside, Terry sat in his recliner, frailer than Cam remembered, but still sharp-eyed. Sadie was bustling around the kitchen, a picture of domesticity that Cam knew was an act. "Cam." Terry's face lit up when he saw him. "What a surprise, kid. You didn't have to come all this way." "I wanted to check in," Cam said, forcing a smile. "Mind if I talk to Sadie for a minute?" Sadie appeared in the doorway, her expression guarded. "Well, look who it is," she said, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Big shot banker gracing us with his presence." Cam ignored the jab, his voice calm but firm. "We need to talk. Outside." On the porch, Cam wasted no time. "I know about the withdrawals from Terry's account," he said, his tone icy. "The bank flagged the activity." Sadie's eyes narrowed. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't lie to me, Mom," Cam snapped. "Jewelry? Electronics? Terry doesn't buy those things. This isn't just about the money. It's about taking advantage of a man who's like family to me." Sadie's defiance faltered for a moment, but she quickly recovered. "I've been taking care of him," she said, her voice rising. "Cooking, cleaning, making sure he's not alone. Don't I deserve something for that?" Cam's anger boiled over. "Deserve something? You don't steal from the one person who's shown me kindness in this town. He's the reason I got out of here, and you're using him." Sadie crossed her arms, her face hard. "You think you're better than me, don't you? Always have, but you're just like your father, running off to chase your dreams and forgetting about the people who raised you." Cam's voice dropped, low and cold. "You didn't raise me, Mom. You dragged me down every chance you got. Terry was more of a parent to me than you ever were." Sadie's face twisted with rage, but she said nothing. Cam turned and walked back into the house, leaving her fuming on the porch. Cam sat down with Terry, carefully explaining the situation without upsetting him. Terry shook his head, a mixture of sadness and resignation in his eyes. "I didn't want to believe it," he said softly. "She seemed like she was trying to help." "She wasn't," Cam said firmly. "But I'll make sure this stops." He contacted the bank and arranged for tighter controls on the account. Sadie would no longer have access, and Cam promised to personally oversee Terry's finances from that point forward. He even hired a trustworthy local caregiver to step in and provide the support Terry truly needed. Cam knew his mother well, so he planned to catch Sadie in the act. He worked with the bank to monitor activity on Terry's account, then set a trap by depositing a lump sum under the pretense of covering medical expenses. Sadie took the bait. Within days, she used the money to purchase an extravagant necklace. Cam confronted her at the jewelry store, flanked by a store manager who had been briefed on the situation. "Care to explain this?" Cam asked, holding up the receipt. Sadie's face twisted with indignation. "You don't understand," she snapped. "I was doing it for Terry. He needs someone to take care of him." Cam's voice hardened. Terry needed someone to care for him, not rob him blind. The store manager discreetly called the police. Sadie was arrested on the spot. Cam decided to visit Sadie. He sat in the cold, sterile visitation room of the county jail, staring at the glass partition that separated him from his mother. Sadie sat on the other side, her face gaunt, her once vibrant auburn hair now dull and streaked with gray. But her eyes, those sharp, unyielding eyes, still held the same bitterness that had haunted Cam his entire life. "You think you've won, don't you?" she spat, gripping the receiver with knuckles white from rage. "You think you're better than me?" Cam exhaled slowly, his grip tightening around the phone. "I didn't come here to argue, Mom," Sadie scoffed. "Then why the hell are you here? To rub it in my face? To see me locked up like some animal while you sit in your fancy office in your fancy city? You think you got out, but you'll always be trash like me." Cam swallowed back the familiar sting of her words. "I came because I needed to see if you had it in you to take responsibility, to own up to what you did." Sadie laughed, a hollow, bitter sound. "What I did? You did this to me, Cam. You always thought you were too good for me, too good for this town. You abandoned your family, left me struggling, and now look where I am. This is your fault." Cam nodded slowly, as if he expected the response. "You do need to take a long, hard look at yourself, Sadie. You've been running from the truth for too long. Blaming Terry, blaming me, blaming everyone but yourself. When does it stop?" She rolled her eyes, but her fingers fidgeted with the edge of the table. "Oh, spare me the self-help nonsense. I'm fine, Cam. I've always been fine. I don't need your pity," she muttered finally, her voice quieter now. "It's not pity," Cam replied. "It's hope. I don't want to see you throw your life away." Her eyes snapped back to his, sharp and suspicious. "Hope? That's rich coming from you." Cam sighed, leaning forward again, his voice softening. "I'm not your enemy, Sadie. I never was. But you have to decide what you want from your life. Is this it? Sitting here, angry at the world, blaming everyone for your mistakes? Or are you going to do something about it?" For a moment, her face crumpled, and she looked almost vulnerable. But then the mask slipped back into place, and her lips curled into a cold smile. "You really think you've got me all figured out, don't you?" she said. "Well, newsflash, Cam, people don't change, and I don't need saving." Cam studied her for a long moment, then stood, sliding his chair back with a scrape. "Maybe you're right," he said quietly. "Maybe people don't change, but you're not people, Sadie. You're you. And I think, deep down, you know you can be better than this." He stood, placing the receiver down gently. "Goodbye, Mom." He turned to leave, his footsteps echoing in the silent room. Before he reached the door, he paused and glanced back over his shoulder. "I'll be around if you decide you want to try," he said. "But the choice is yours, Sadie. Always has been." Sadie didn't respond, her face a carefully crafted mask of indifference. But as the door closed behind Cam, she sat back in her chair, her hands trembling slightly. For the first time in a long while, the anger that usually fueled her felt hollow, leaving a gnawing uncertainty in its place. And for the first time, she wondered if maybe, just maybe, Cam was right. As Cam left the jail, a sense of liberation washed over him. He had spent years trying to prove his worth to a woman who could never see it. Now, he realized he didn't need her approval. Returning to his life on the East Coast, Cam stayed true to the values Terry had instilled in him. He continued to honor the man who had believed in him when no one else did, ensuring Terry's final years were filled with dignity and comfort. As for Sadie, she served her sentence in solitude, her manipulative ways alienating even the few who had once pitied her. In the end, the dusty town of Cedar Bluff became a distant memory for Cam, a reminder of where he had come from, and a testament to the strength it took to rise above. Back on the East Coast, Cam found a renewed sense of purpose. He poured his energy into the community, volunteering at a local youth center where he mentored teens who reminded him of his younger self, angry, aimless, and in desperate need of guidance. Cam saw in them a chance to offer what Terry had given him, a path forward, built on hope and hard work. Hope you enjoyed the story of heartbreak and healing. Help our channel grow. Like, share, and subscribe. Thank you from Green Tea Tales.